Hey everyone, apologies for the rocky start there. The phone fell out of the tripod thing that holds it, so like that's not the best. And I don't have my lapel mic, so we're not off to the best start here. But that being said, it's been an interesting day, so I'm a little late. But let's put all of my transgressions aside and get to the point of this video, which is a question that somebody had in our Slack that I thought I would answer as a nice change of pace. This one's a little different from like the normal fare about how to be a freelancer. And what we're looking at here is kind of more about like if I've got a business, or it could apply to a freelance practice, but like how do I build an audience? And so I'm going to read this, but anonymize it because I'm not looking to give out anyone's specific information. I've been struggling to create content and figure out how to build an audience for about 18 months and would like to gather some wisdom if possible. I have a site that serves as a blog and a landing page for a podcast and a new addition, which is a YouTube channel. We've been struggling to figure out how to create and bring value to the target audience. And we've been thinking about making investments in equipment and tools. But I'm not sure if we can afford that right now. So any input on this? The first thing I think I'll say, just that's like low-hanging fruit here, is the difference between you having an audience and not having one isn't a lack of tools. It's a common thing for people, especially like where I come from, software engineering, to get really involved in thinking about like what kind of website should I have, like what tools should I use and all that. That really winds up being kind of a way to procrastinate almost, because that's what you understand, like the technical minutia of what you're doing. The hard thing is figuring out the hard question being asked here, which is like, how do I build an audience? So like for me, I'll post this on YouTube where I hit subscribe as, I don't know, 90 followers or something. I have another YouTube channel, which is Dead Tech, and that has, I don't know how many, 600, something like that. And then I have a blog with like thousands of followers. Anyway, this isn't like to flex. You just watched me fumble my phone, and I feel like it's upside down, like I'm looking into the wrong side of the camera. Like all of these are bad production things, but I still have an audience. Like, would I have more of an audience if I actually was any good at AV and these media? Maybe. But the difference between zero and a lot of audience is not stuff like that. So I think it's probably worth going to first principles here. And looking at like, what does it mean to build an audience? Like, how do you do that? And in the content marketing world where hit subscribe is, I think of there are kind of two ways to bring people in to a website. And this could, in some senses, be true of a podcast or a set of videos or anything that you're doing content-wise. And this is painting with really broad strokes, but one of those ways would be to answer tactical questions that people have, help them. And for instance, that's what SEO and organic search is really all about. What's happening is people type keywords into the search engine, which is really them asking a question. And your goal is to answer that question so that Google will make you number one. And then they'll click on that post where you answer their question. So if they're Googling, Chinese takeout nearby, and you have written some roundup of like Chinese takeout places in your area, that result might come up first, and they click on your roundup of these different Chinese takeout places. That's the way you get in front of people when you're solving a tactical problem they have. Same thing on YouTube. Like if you were Googling how to replace a leaky sink, like somebody's done a video about that, and so they're hoping to get in front of you when you have that tactical problem. Another way to get in front of people, or like the complementary way to get in front of them, is really to kind of stay in front of them. And I'll call that either entertaining them or providing sustaining value. So basically you're thinking of this as giving them a reason to come back. Meaning, if I'm Googling or typing into YouTube, like how do I fix my sink, and I find a video, that's cool, but that's pretty transactional. So I might watch that video and really, thank that creator. I might even throw the video a like. Am I going to subscribe to that video? Probably not. I mean, most people don't. So there's a lot of one and done when you get in front of people solving the actual problems that they have. But if you're putting content on your site that solves tactical problems and ranks for keywords, it's a good way to get them onto the site. The other piece of that is, in the content marketing world, we call this nurture, where once they hit your site, you want to figure out how to keep their attention and preserve it. I'm mentioning all that because really building an audience is the preserve it part. So there are different ways you could do this. For instance, you could really focus on SEO, on search engine optimization, bringing in traffic through Google. And that can get a lot of traffic to your site, but it doesn't necessarily get that traffic to stick around. You can, and people do, build entire sites that are like review or niche income sites that like get people to read a post. Hopefully they click some affiliate link and like buy something. And that's their entire relationship with the site. So that site has a lot of traffic, but it's not building an audience. So let's talk about building an audience. How do you get people, once they're engaged with you in some way, to follow you? The first thing I would say there is, in order to do that, you're going to need to consistently and predictably create and publish content over a fairly long period of time. That content is going to need to be thematic, for the most part, relevant around some core theme, unless you're just like an amazing writer, and maybe people just show up to read whatever you happen to write about. Like, that does exist. But more commonly, you will create content consistently over the course of time, and it all revolves around kind of a common theme, even if it isn't always the same thing. And on some level, it entertains people, or it provides them consistent value, or it does something compelling for them that they want it in their life over and over again. That's the nature of an audience. So here are a few examples. The way that a lot of like YouTube creators work is you run across a YouTube video because the algorithm shows it to you. You enjoy that creator, and then they say all their stuff at the end, like, hey, like and subscribe and blah, blah, blah. And you probably don't do any of that, but then maybe they show up in your feed again, and the second or third time you're like, hey, I like this person, and then you subscribe. Now you are part of their audience, because they have created a mechanism for you to return to them and to see the content they're putting out. When I was building my blog Dead Tech 10 years ago, and over the course of the time between then and now, the way that most of my audience came to follow me when I would write content, they would subscribe via RSS feed. So what I'm getting at here is, you create content, you want to do it predictably, kind of on a schedule. So the reason I say that is because if there's a blog, like we've all seen this, where somebody, squirts out like 5 blog posts because they're really excited in the first week, and then there's like 2 the second week, and then there's none for a month, and then there's none, and then there's one like 6 months later, you're not going to follow that blog, because that gives every indication that that person got really excited for a couple of weeks and then just petered out. Whereas if you go to a blog and you find that that content creator is creating content every week or even every month, but if it's regular, if it's dependable, that makes you more likely to show up. So you want to consistently create content. You want to create that content, like I said earlier, around a theme, because that's what's going to bind the audience to you. So like whatever you like to watch on YouTube, like for me, it's kind of a mix of things, videos about astronomy, foolish baseball. It's an interesting baseball nerd thing. So that's all around a theme. I go to that channel to watch like interesting arcania about baseball. If that person started posting about his politics, I'd probably not watch that video. So if you get too incoherent and you just write about whatever you want, like a journal, unless you're really entertaining and really interesting as a writer, like a really good creative writer, that probably won't work. So you want thematic consistency, and you want content production consistency, and then it starts to really be a game of attrition, so to speak. So you want to create that content over a fairly long period of time, and you want to create it around a core set of themes. So in order to do that, you need to, number one, make sure that you care about the subject matter, because if you don't, it's going to be really hard to produce consistent content. And when you do, it's going to read like what it is, which is a chore to write. So you want it to be something you care about and are passionate about, dare I say. It should be something you have opinions on and experience with, so that you can keep this constant production of content going. One thing I would suggest doing, especially for a newbie creator, like a blogger, video creator, I don't know what you call a video anyway, it doesn't matter, vlogger, you probably want to build up a backlog of topics before you start publishing, because otherwise you're going to have kind of 2 problems to solve. So if you just publish a blog post and then publish another one the next week and you run out of ideas, the whole thing can run out of steam, and then you become one of those content channels that's a ghost town for weeks at a time. Whereas if you do an exercise in the beginning to come up with a lot of potential topics, then you can start to build up a backlog so that when you actually put out content, it gets easier to maintain the schedule. And in general, I would separate topic brainstorming in whatever medium you're doing from the actual production of the content. So that is something that can help. You want a backlog because that's going to help you with consistency. And then you want to build up that backlog and then start publishing. Now, when it comes to coming up with new and more ideas, I would also suggest that alongside road mapping out some actual ideas for posts or videos or whatever, that you also brainstorm some sources of inspiration. So, for instance, an easy one for me when I was doing a lot of blogging on Dead Tech is I could go read like other blog articles or threads on Hacker News or Reddit or something, and it wouldn't be long before I found something that I'd profoundly disagree with. And then I would fight the natural human impulse to go in and really duke it out with other randos in the comments. And hey, instead of that, why don't I just write a piece of content for my own site about this? So that's one place where you're going to say, okay, even when I'm out of ideas, I'm going to go read this site for half an hour, and then I'm going to really disagree with people and have some things to say here. So create a backlog of ideas, and then in the meta sense, create a backlog of ways to generate ideas. That will give you enough on the idea front to get going and then to sustain you for that consistency. So to recap here, when we're talking about building an audience, we're talking about starting with momentum, preserving that momentum, so being consistent thematically, being consistent on a publishing schedule, and all of this creates the sense for anyone who comes to your site that there is going to be content whenever they show up, and they can count on it being relevant, and they can count on probably enjoying it if they've enjoyed any representative piece of content they've seen so far. Now, you'll notice that I haven't said much about like create really good content, go and maybe get a graduate degree in creative writing or whatever. And that's because it doesn't actually like have to be all that great, whether it's about like the aesthetics of it in the video production sense, or whether it's a super polished piece of prose or whatever. I'm not saying that if you have dumb ideas and terrible takes, that'll work, but like it doesn't have to be as polished as you think other people are, especially seasoned producers that have produced thousands of pieces of content. You don't need to do that. It's more important to be consistent, thematic with your message, and then that will resonate with people that agree with you or like your point of view. And as you start to build more and more of a following, number one, you'll get better at creating the content. You'll have more practice. And number two, there's kind of a network effect, I guess you could, that's not the right word, but like if you have 500 or 1,000 or 10,000 followers, that makes other people more likely to follow you. So it's a snowball rolling downhill. So I wouldn't in the beginning be overly worried that you're not like good enough at the medium. If you're putting things out there that help or that resonate with some people or that are interesting in some way, you'll pick that stuff up. So I guess as I'm talking about this one thing, I've kind of talked about how to sustain and grow an audience once you've got that seed there, but like how do you seed the initial audience? If you do what I did, which is stupid, don't do that. Like with Dead Tech, I just kind of wrote stuff, and I was content to have basically an online journal for a couple years, and I don't know how many people ever read that, like my coworkers and maybe my parents occasionally. But it did sort of, over the course of time, somehow or another, pick up followers here and there. And then I remember the first time I had a post go viral, I don't know, like 10 years, well, viral, relatively speaking. It had like 1,000 readers, which dwarfed the like 10 a week I would get. Some of those readers stuck around, and then it started to grow. So if you just produce content enough and kind of show it to people sporadically, you can, on a long enough timeline, build an audience. That being said, there are faster ways to build an audience. So one of them I mentioned in the beginning is the SEO play. If you are building up a regular column, you could figure out a way to get people onto your site through the search engine and then show them the content that you want them to subscribe to. That's one way of doing it. If you have some money, you could run ads and get people onto your content that way. If you're not feeling like spending money or it's not an overly commercial endeavor just yet, you could go participate in forums where you're doing Q&A or you're making comments or whatever. And then where appropriate, you can say, hey, here's my answer to this question. And by the way, if you're interested, I wrote a whole blog post on that. And if that's genuinely helpful, that person might click on your blog post and really like it and subscribe or bookmark your site or something. So you can go out and kind of pound the pavement a little bit. In the question here, it mentioned podcasts and YouTube videos, getting guest spots on things like that, whether it's guest blogging on somebody else's site or being a guest on a podcast or a video, if people are doing that. Those things can be great ways to get in front of a new audience, because that's really what you do. You want to build up this consistent engine for long enough that people can see it's worth sticking around if they get to your stuff. And then you need to get in front of other audiences. That could be by participating in forums. It could be by appearing as guests on different pieces of media. It could be by taking whatever social media following you have and trying to get those folks to engage with the blog posts when you promote a link to them via a tweet or whatever. It could be honestly deconstructing those blog posts as to like series of shares on social media, because social media doesn't really like showing you links that take you off their platform. So there's a lot of ways to do it. But let me wrap at this point. This is kind of me dumping my bucket without much, if any, rehearsal. Well, no rehearsal. I started thinking this through like a few minutes beforehand. I meant to give it more time, but like I said, busy. I'm fumbling my camera at the beginning. So to kind of recap what we're talking about when it comes to audience building, I'm thinking of the mechanics of it in this way. You need to build basically an engine of content. You need to get it so that you're producing content on a regular schedule, and you need to get it so that you're producing that content consistently around a theme that will be of interest. And that is the thing that's going to keep people reading your content episodically. So when you produce that engine, when you get a good backlog of topic ideas, a machine for generating more ideas, and then you use all that to fuel your content engine, once that engine leaves the station, you then go out and start to think, okay, I've got the engine and it's moving. I'm going to mix metaphors here, but whatever. The engine is moving. Now I need to get people to board it, to be aware of it. So you've got your content, it's going. Then you have to figure out how do you get those first eyeballs on it. And that's going to be social share, forum participation, guest appearances, and generally just kind of trying to get out there in front of people, share it with friends and family if you think it would interest them, all that type of stuff. So I will also say that sharing game, it takes a while. It's not easy. It takes some persistence. But if you do that for a while and you have that consistent engine of content that you keep going, once you kind of are moving, it will keep moving and your audience will keep growing. But the key components there are the ideas, the consistency, the predictability, and then just sticking to it and getting people's eyeballs initially on it. Since we're a content marketing business, by the way, I'm going to close with something, which is to say, building an audience is kind of cool because I think I've gone into this in other videos, but like what content marketing really is about at its core, if you're trying to market to people, you need to get their attention at some point. But at the point where you get their attention, they're probably not interested in getting out their wallet to give you money. So you need to get their attention. And then what you need to do is stay in their mind at least enough until they are ready to give you money or subscribe or buy or whatever. So you're bridging this gap between what's called awareness, when they become aware of you, and when they are ready to engage with you commercially. So when we're talking about building an audience, the nice thing about doing that is that your audience is by definition people that are constantly aware of you. So at any time, they might decide that they want to become a customer. So that's the upside of building an audience. The downside of building an audience is that it is a ton of work. So you don't need to build followers as the only way to nurture somebody from that awareness point all the way on to a purchase. And like the easiest example I could give you of that is you could create a site where you seeded it with nothing but content designed to do the first thing I talked about, which is like help, the transactional, like how to fix stuff, how to fix a leaky sink or whatever. And say you hosted that video on your site, or you got people to your site somehow. You could you could do a social media pixel, which is for remarketing. It's why after you visit a site, you see them show up on Facebook. So you could get their attention that way and then target them with ads over the long haul to keep getting their attention. So that's a way you can bring somebody from aware of you to customer without ever having them become an audience member of yours. The best example I can give of that is like when I first encountered a Snuggie, I was like, that's a weird thing. And then they'd remark it to me often enough that at one point I was like, hey, my wife would like that as a gift, like 6 months later. So they nurtured me along in a way that didn't involve me subscribing to the Snuggie blog, not a thing I would have done. So I'm mentioning that only to say, to close out the video, that building an audience is great, because an audience is a very, like, it makes you feel good to have an audience, but also people that are your audience are receptive to things that you might want to sell them because they trust you. You built trust. So they think if you're going to go to them and say, hey, I have this idea, or you should do business with me, they trust you. You've earned their trust. And that is a great thing to have for any number of reasons. But it is not the only way to bring traffic to a commercial enterprise. And it can be a pretty long tail and expensive one at that. So anyway, that's what I have to say about audience building in a commercial context. If you're just writing a blog and you love doing it, which is in a sense what Dead Tech was for a lot of years, where I built an audience, then forget all that stuff about being commercial. If you just like creating content and you build a following as you create that content, that's a great relationship, that parasocial relationship between creator and audience. It kind of works for everybody. It's fun to have a platform. It's fun to create content for me. And if people are out there reading or watching it or whatever, I'm guessing they're getting some enjoyment out of it. So that can be enough if your goal is purely to kind of share and contribute to the world. So that's my take on building an audience such as it is. I hope that was interesting, and I will catch you all next time.